Hi guys, this is our Reptile Basics. By the end of this video, you should be able to describe the characteristics that make a reptile a reptile. You should be able to outline the evolution of reptiles, classify the class Reptilia into subclasses and orders, and explain the general characteristics of the three main reptiles. So what makes a reptile a reptile? Well, they have scales, not fur or feathers. Their skin is dry, especially compared to that moist skin of the amphibians. Most of them lay eggs, but sometimes they bear live young. Instead of actual ears, they just have ear holes. They either have 4 legs or no legs at all, and if they have legs, their stance is kind of more upright than the amphibians. Amphibians will drag their bellies on the ground a little more, whereas reptiles are propped up more. Reptiles are ectothermic, meaning that their body temperature is regulated by their environment. Most are poikilothermic, meaning that their body temperature varies, but some, like crocodiles and alligators, are more homeothermic, where they maintain a relatively constant body temperature. Reptiles are the first amniotes. Amniotes include reptiles, birds, and mammals, the vertebrates that have certain adaptations to living on land. And the biggest one of those adaptations that's common in all amniotes is the amniotic egg. And at the top right here, there's a diagram of an amniotic egg that shows that inside the egg there's the embryo, and then there's these what are called extra embryonic membranes. There's different membranes that do different jobs to support the embryo inside the egg, so that it can be protected and supported for longer in there and develop more. So there's the embryo. Right outside the embryo is the amnion, and that's a fluid-filled sac that protects the embryo. Then there's the chorion, is where gas exchange happens. The yolk offers nourishment, like food, for the developing embryo, and then the allantois helps with waste disposal. In addition to that, amniotes have less permeable skin than amphibians do, and like I said before, a more upright stance. So when you look at how amniotes are now kind of classified, it's a little bit tricky, because we think of reptiles, and we're going to think of reptiles for the sake of our course, as snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles, alligators, right? But when we look at when we do DNA analysis and look at their common ancestors, it actually turns out that snakes and lizards have more in common, or a closer common ancestor, with birds than they do with turtles, and that crocodiles and alligators are way closer related to birds than they are to some of the other reptiles. So remember when Ed Corey said that some herpetologists are annoyed that the state reptile is a turtle? That's kind of because of this, because the turtles are kind of far removed from some of the other reptiles. So the way that the way that things are kind of classified is that well, first there's 2 main groups. The Sauropsida is reptiles and birds, and then the Synapsida is the mammals. So when we talk about reptiles, they're all going to be Sauropsida. But then the reptiles are divided into anapsids and diapsids, and birds are diapsids, but so are snakes, lizards, and crocodiles. So those are all diapsids. And then the turtles are the anapsids. And the biggest difference that you can see morphologically between those groups is that the diapsids have these 2 holes behind the orbital of their skull. Synapsids, mammals, have 1 hole back there, and the anapsids, the turtles, don't have that hole. This urapsid is, they are all extinct. So the way that reptiles are classified is into 2 subclasses. There's Archosauria and the Lepidosauria. And the Archosauria has the turtles and the crocodiles. So this is kind of strange, right? Because in the past slide we showed that the turtles and the crocodiles really weren't that related evolutionarily, but classification is a weird thing, and this is how we're going, though. And then the subclass, Lepidosauria, is the snakes and lizards. So order Testudines, that's the turtles. Order Crocodilia is the alligators and crocodiles. Order Squamata is the snakes and lizards. So we're going to go through each of those orders and just talk about the real basic characteristics. In lab, we've been going into more detail about the families, but just understanding some of the characteristics of this is important. So the Testudines, the turtles, they all have a shell, a box-like shell. There's the upper and the lower shields that attach to the ribs. The dorsal shell, that's the one on the back, is that's called the carapace, and so I think of it, that's what they carry on their back, is the carapace. And then the plastron is that shell on the ventral side, and I think of it as it's plastered on there. The carapace is a fusion of vertebrae and ribs with the dermal bones, so it's really part of their skeleton. Their shell is covered with these little shield-like pieces, and those are called scutes. Turtles can be really long-lived. Some of them live over 100 years. They don't have teeth. They have a shark beak, which is also called a tomia. Order Crocodilia includes the alligators and crocodiles. These are large and semi-aquatic. The only two in the United States are the American alligator and the American crocodile. What's pretty cool about these is they look almost prehistoric. Their body hasn't changed in 75 million years, so evolution isn't happening too quickly on these guys. They all have a long, flattened snout, but as we talked about in lab, the difference between the alligator and the crocodiles is way more narrow than the alligator is nice and broad, right? They have a strong, laterally compressed tail, so it's kind of like a keel. It helps them get through the water, propel them through the water. And these guys are carnivorous. The last order, Squamata, the lizards and snakes. This is the largest order, containing over 6,000 species. Super diverse, too. They're spread all over the world. They vary widely in size. There's some tiny, tiny ones and some enormous ones. Their diets vary. There's some that are carnivorous, some that are herbivorous, some omnivores, so just about everything. Same thing with reproduction. Some live birth, some lay eggs. Very wide variety here, and we've gone over a lot of that in lab with the different families. So let's just go back and make sure that you have notes on all of the points here. You should be able to describe the characteristics that make reptiles, be able to kind of understand that the evolution of reptiles. So just understand that certain reptiles like snakes and lizards are actually more closely related to birds than they are to turtles, but that classification is actually lagging behind, or at least the classification that we're using. So you do want to also understand the subclasses and orders that we're using for the reptiles, and then explain the general characteristics of those three main orders. So make sure you have some notes on that. And then I think that a couple of us have talked about this, but I want to make sure that everybody is in on this piece of reptile trivia. Very exciting. What's the only species in the world, and this is the only species of vertebrate, only species of any animal, I think, in the world whose scientific name is exactly the same as its common name? Think about it. I'll give you a hint. It's a reptile. My other hint is that it's not bison, because although the bison's scientific name is bison, you don't call a bison. You don't say it twice. So this one, it's the exact same as what you call it. Are you ready? Yes. It's boa constrictor. Isn't your life more enriched now that you know that? All right. See you in class.